welcome everybody to Hackney's Planning Committee. Bit less formal than we normally are, but generally for members, the declaration of interest and most of those rules apply. We can ask questions, but if we could refrain from taking a strong position on all of this, that would help you when you come to be the decision maker at what I imagine will be a future meeting. So we've got members on our right, Councillor Hanson, Councillor Race and Councillor Bell. We've got a housing officer who's been with us a long time, knows most of the history, Anne back there, and I recognise one or two of Barclays Homes. And for members of the public, we've also got a legal officer here. So we're a properly constituted committee meeting. We've got our head of planning and our committee officer. I once called the person a clerk, and she didn't like that. So committee officer. So we're here just to hear where we are at with the further phases of the Woodbury Down development, and so the order of business is going to be first apologies for absence. We've got a few, haven't we?
We've had apologies for absence from Councillor Garcia and Councillor Levy. I'll just double check who else. And Councillor Chowan.
Thank you. And Christine, we understand Councillor Young is on her way. Is she now counted out of this meeting, or can she just come in and join us?
I'm of the view that she can still join us because there's no formal decision going to be made tonight.
Okay.
This is just early meeting,
Okay. Okay, good enough. If everybody else is happy with that, I am. Declarations of interest, members, are there any? No, we'll have to ask Councillor Young when she arrives. So to consider the proposal. So how it runs is we have our officer, Catherine, who will talk to us for 5 or 10 minutes, max 10 minutes, I hope, Catherine. Then a presentation from, I think we've got the architect here. And it's your entire presentation, is it? Yep. And we've got obviously members of Barclays to help us if we have questions. And I think Anne is just here to listen and help us as a council officer. So over to Catherine, please. And just to remind everybody, you need to put your mic on so everybody knows what you're saying.
Good evening. I'm just going to get my presentation up, which you will be relieved to hear is very brief. If you could let me know when that's showing, that would be fantastic.
Yes, we can see it, Catherine.
Brilliant. So the pre-application proposals before you tonight relate to Woodbury Down, which is the largest housing estate in Hackney. It's undergoing an ongoing regeneration programme to revitalise the housing, community facilities and public realm within the estate boundaries. The redevelopment has to date delivered significant benefits, including public access to the reservoirs and their use for leisure and biodiversity, new community spaces including the Edge Youth Hub and the replacement Robin Redmond Centre, financial contributions exceeding £8 million towards reducing and mitigating the impact of Seven Sisters Road through the estate, and more than 850 affordable housing units, including more than 500 social rented homes, with phase 3, which is under construction, due to deliver a further 243 affordable.
1 minute, Catherine. Councillor Young's arrived, so we need to let her sit down. And if you could just be a little bit slower, Catherine.
Certainly.
1 minute. I think she's talking to the legal officer, so if we can wait. Oh, there's Councillor Potter as well. Councillor Potter, are you staying with us or are you just popping in?
I hope to stay with you the whole duration. Is it till 8?
Say again?
What time does the meeting finish roughly?
I don't know. I don't know. I need to ask you, have you got any declarations of interest, Claire?
No, I don't think so. No, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
That sounds a
Okay.
little bit vague. No.
Okay. Taking part. Okay, so we've just got arrived. Claire Potter, Councillor Potter. She's got no declaration of interest. Sarah, declarations of interest, please. Okay, thank you. Hello, Catherine. If you could start again, please.
Certainly. Good evening. The proposals before you tonight relate to Woodbury Down, which is the largest housing estate in Hackney. It's undergoing an ongoing regeneration programme to revitalise the housing, community facilities and public realm within the estate boundaries. It's to date delivered significant benefits, including public access to the reservoirs, new community spaces, financial contributions exceeding £8 million towards reducing the impact of Seven Sisters Road, and more than 850 affordable housing units, with phase 3 due to deliver a further 243 affordable properties, of which almost half will be for social rent. This diagram shows the phases within the estate. Those shown in blue here, up in the north here, centrally here, and over to the east here, and phase 2 shown in yellow here have already been delivered. Phase 3 in pink is currently under construction and has consent for 584 homes. The remaining phases 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8 are the subject of the current pre-application, which will deliver a new master plan for the outstanding phases. Phase 4 is intended to be delivered in detail, with the later phases expected to be consented in outline, with subsequent reserved matters to be considered on a phase-by-phase basis. The Woodbury Down estate is a site allocation in LP 33, Hackney's local plan, and as such its redevelopment for the provision of housing-led development is acceptable in principle. However, any forthcoming proposals are expected to provide, in line with the policy requirements, a zero-carbon, high sustainability development delivering high-quality, affordable and market housing, together with further enhancements to the public realm, public and active transport choices, and retail and community facilities. The pre-application proposals are to be put before members by the applicant this evening in a presentation that will cover firstly the general principles for the master plan and secondly the initial concepts for the detail of phase 4. The scheme is being brought to members at a very early stage, which is reflected in the level of detail being presented. They were presented to a design review panel earlier this month, and the views of both the DRP and members will feed back into the evolving proposals. It's expected that there will be at least one further round of DRP and pre-app planning subcommittee before the submission of an application for planning permission. And I will now hand over to Martin Kiefer of LDS, who will be presenting the application on behalf of Berkeley Homes.
Thank you. Just one question. We've got Councillor Joseph in the room. Declarations of interest, Councillor Joseph. None. Thank you.
Actually, it's Rob Winkley from Rolf Judd who's going to introduce this, and Martin will come in shortly after. Martin is from Liftshut Davison Sandilands, who's the lead architect heading the new master plan. Behind me, I've got Jamie Powell from Berkeley Homes, and we're all available and willing to answer questions at the end of the presentation. The fundamental question really is, why are we here? And it's because we've got a 2014 master plan, which underdelivers. It underdelivers on the expected number of homes, and that was evidenced in phase 3 when we had to resort to putting in a full planning application rather than relying on reserved matters. We're also here because the world's moved on a bit since 2014 in a number of ways. Hackney have got a new local plan, we've got a new London plan, we've got a distinct shift in emphasis on green technology and low carbon, quite rightly, and we've got issues such as urban greening factor to have a look at as well. And it's a chance, as with all good planning principles, to reflect on what's been delivered and take a look at how to keep improving and how to keep moving forward. We also know, bluntly, that you want us to keep as many trees as possible. We bear the scars of previous battles on that issue. What we don't want to do is start afresh. So when we talk about a new master plan, we're talking really about an iteration of the 2014 master plan, which itself was an iteration of the 2009 master plan, the original one. So we don't want to start afresh. We've got a half-delivered master plan already, and it's really starting to come together. We don't want to throw a lot away. So what we're looking at is not a blank canvas. We want to build on the principles of what's already been delivered. We want to deliver high-quality public realm. We want to deliver the numbers that you're expecting, frankly, from Woodbury Down, and it's an opportunity it's a cliche, but it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If we under-deliver on this, we don't get it back in 20 years' time to have another go. This is it. So we really want to be able to push it as far as possible within reasonable limits, and that's the reason why we're here tonight for a discussion with you. Martin.
Thanks, Rob. Can I just check? So I am screen sharing, but it's not coming up on here, so the people here can't see it. Here we go. Thanks, Rob, for the introduction. Rob talked quite a lot about what's changed in the period since the last master plan. But to start this evening, we want to take a little look back. I'm going to assume that everybody here is familiar with the site, more than familiar with the general area of the scheme. But we want to talk just quickly about some of the themes that have emerged from our review of where the site sits at the moment and where it's come from in the past. And these are things that are influencing our approach to delivering the next stages of the master plan at Woodbury. So just these are broad topics that will then kind of show you how they're influencing some of our initial thoughts on the master plan. So the first one from us, our perspective as architects, is really trying to understand the history of the estate, where it's come from, the types of buildings, and actually quite a lot of the qualities and contemporary issues that they were dealing with when the master plan was designed in the post-war period. For us, that goes to our personal interest in the architecture of the buildings, but also the idea of Woodbury Down as a place and the community that exists around it. And where this comes into the development of the next stages of the master plan is particularly pertinent about the identity of the buildings of the place that's being created at Woodbury. And if we are observing the development to date, perhaps there has been a slight missed opportunity in providing a greater reference to what has existed in the past. That can be through built form, and there are qualities to the existing buildings that are positive and could make reference to in a developing master plan. But also just how do we create the idea of a neighbourhood at Woodbury Down that is reflected in its buildings and its public realm, perhaps more so than the development has been achieved to date, more consistency. In looking at the phases of the master plan that have been delivered so far, while a lot has been achieved, particularly the public realm and the natural landscape around the master plan, looking at the beyond the housing and looking at the other uses that are within the master plan, there is a lot that's there. There's schools, retail opportunities, community space. But what is provided, which is in the diagram on the left, is somewhat thinly spread, come about because of the way that the master plan has been developed in a phased fashion. and with each phase, a piece of infrastructure has been delivered. What that perhaps lacks in the current condition is a location, a sense of intensity at the centre of the master plan that a neighbourhood like Woodbury Down, we think, deserves, a place that is essentially the heart of the neighbourhood in the future. And that's one thing that we're thinking very carefully about when we design the master plan. How can we create a centre and not leave the kind of distribution of other uses that exists at the moment and create greater focus? What is at Woodbury Down that is fantastic at the moment and particularly pertinent in this post-COVID, hopefully post-COVID world, is the natural environment. And this is one of the big things that goes to making Woodbury Down a specific location, the connection with water that exists on the south of the estate around the redeveloped the reservoirs, the contrast of the more lively and kind of active reservoir as opposed to the wildlife trusts, nature reserve and the quieter environs of that space. This is something that we want to make central to the developing master plan and really key into Woodbury Down as a place delivering an environment that builds on these with the opportunities that exist, particularly on the north of the site. And the final thing is coming back to the 2014 master plan and what it was trying to achieve. That is the 2014 master plan on the screen. One of the key things is that it was intended to do was stitch the estate together, particularly in terms of movement, but also in terms of structure and green space. And this comes back to the principle that we're not, this is the next steps in the evolution of the master plan. It's not a completely new thinking. So we are coming in halfway through a process and working out how we stitch these next phases of the master plan into what's being built, from the green spaces and the selection of public realm and open space that the master plan needs to deliver, but also the amenities and infrastructure that the estate needs in the next steps of its development. So when we looked at the 2014 master plan and in the scheme that we're developing, there were certain things that we wanted to build upon and some areas of potential change. And what's on screen are the 5 kind of most pertinent, significant changes. I'm going to go from 5 to 1 on this rather than the other way around, because I should have done this the other way around in the presentation. On the right, designing for existing trees, as Rob said, it has been a significant issue locally, and we want to make sure that the master plan that we're working on recognises the importance of trees on the estate and, where possible, retains those of value. And I'll talk through a bit about what that means and impacts on the master plan in a minute. Phase 6, which is the area to the north of Seven Sisters Road, the scheme that we are looking at the moment has a reduction in area in comparison with 2014. It omits the houses that sit on Woodbury Grove North, and so phase 6 is reduced. That has an impact on the way that we look at density and numbers, because ultimately we're trying to achieve, look towards achieving the numbers that were in the original, the 2014 scheme, but we're doing it in slightly less space. Number 3, focus on community and commercial areas. The central square, which was always the intention to deliver a neighbourhood space at the heart of the scheme, we totally agree with that and want to build on that, but in a way that is the real focus for both north and south on the estate, and it delivers the neighbourhood space that the estate needs. On the north side, we are looking to enhance the area around New River, and we have some proposals today that we'll talk you through. And really this is looking to reflect the achievements that exist on the south of the estate with the integration with the reservoirs, and get that natural character extending all the way around the estate, both in terms of movement and landscape quality, and bringing those factors into the future residential areas. And the last one on the left is the original 2014 master plan developed around the concept of green fingers and extending green space from Riverside through to Reservoir on the south. We are still working entirely with that proposal, but we are looking at shifting one of those green fingers to an alternative locations for reasons of adjacency that I'll talk through in a minute. So what's on screen is our illustrative master plan as it stands at the moment. What I'm going to do is talk through some of the component factors of how we've come to this as a scheme and reference it. No, that's our one. So this is the developed scheme, so showing everything that's built to date, including phase 3 as constructed, and then for phases 5 to 8, our proposal. What I'm going to do is talk through the components of how we've got to this to show you how the structure of the master plan has developed. That starts with the green network, which, as I said, the 2014 master plan based around the principle of extending green spaces from Riverside through to Reservoir's edge. A lot of this is also to do with breaking down Seven Sisters Road as an environment and making sure that crossing of that road is more integral to movement within the estate, and that green spaces are visible from Seven Sisters Road, so improving the environment as you move along the street. Now, perhaps in contrast to how the 2014 master plan was set up, there was an underlying principle there that the areas of parkland as they stretched from Riverside to Reservoir were singular in nature. They were character areas of significant parkland that were one piece stretching from one side to the other. Now, we're looking to maintain the positions of the parks and, in fact, increase their size where possible, particularly on the north side. But the way that we're viewing them is more as a series of connected spaces that each have different qualities and provide different experiences in the estate. And this kind of allows us to build on a phased master plan, but also reflect some of the character of spaces that are there at the moment. This is developing thinking and something that we are working on with the landscape architects, not at all set at this point, but just to give you a flavour of what that might mean. So looking at spaces from Spring Park on the south at the moment, which is delivering a kind of more family-orientated space with play spaces, because quite an active area and links in with the reservoir. But then if we take this green chain from one side through to the other types of spaces that may be deliverable within that structure. So potentially number 2 here is looking at the opportunity to create more youth-orientated space around the edge and the youth centre, where there is an existing focus there for that type of activity, and maybe it is a slightly harder, more urban environment. Spaces where, number 3, where we're looking at taking the green link through the back of St Olaf's Church, which accommodate things like play on the way and perhaps more transitory space, but one that's still contributing to the neighbourhood. And then on the north side, the existing park that leads into New River, which actually has a fantastic quality at the moment of a quieter space that contrasts quite nicely with the south. And so we're looking to see how we can build on those qualities to create a range of spaces within the overall master plan. Connecting them all together around the perimeter, we really want to work with New River and the potential for that on the north side of the site to deliver improvements as have been achieved on the south. Ultimately, with the potential to create a walking route and an activity route that walks all the way around the estate and perhaps connects into Finsbury Park as well. We know through our initial consultation that there is concern from residents on the estate about the quality of environment around New River and particularly its safety. And by integrating it into the wider scheme, we can provide benefits for day-to-day users as well as the residents that would live next to it. These are some initial sketches that have been put together by our landscape architects about the type of environment that could entail. We're working with the Wildlife Trust, who helped in the achieving of a similar thing on the south of the estate, working with the various landholders here, which there are several, the Haringey on the right of the river, the wildlife trust, the Thames Water, who actually owned the land around the river itself. But these things have been achieved on the south, and we're looking to reflect that achievement on the north. And we think the opportunity here is massive, both in terms of improvement of public realm, contribution to the estate, and in terms of wildlife, biodiversity, and the ability to create a green chain that would really contribute to the wider area. In our base proposal that we're working on, we are looking at the potential to cross the river as well, with some potential access on the north, which would allow pedestrian access into the areas of Haringey directly to the north. There is a lot of work still to do on this in terms of getting agreement with the various stakeholders, but we think the potential should be utilised. That's a view looking from Green Lanes back over the river, with the potential for this green network connecting around the site. Seven Sisters Road, which we know is a significant issue, both in terms of movement and quality and impact on housing around it. Now, the scheme to date has delivered a certain amount of money that is working towards improvement of that area, with proposals by TfL, who we are working with to improve it. Our work with them is concerned with a couple of things. It's about integrating crossing points and connections, so movement north to south through the estate, and making sure that this movement network is integrated with the green routes, but also in terms of the environment along the street, and how that can be improved. For reference, the two diagrams here are, on the left is the existing condition along the street, and then on the right is where the TfL proposal stands at the moment, along with our initial thoughts about how the building and environment along that street will change. The basis of the TfL proposal is to reduce the number of carriageways along the street from 3 to 2. So instead of 2 traffic lanes and a bus lane, there will be a traffic lane in each direction and a bus lane in each direction. What that does is free up space on the north side to introduce a bi-directional cycle path that is part of wider proposals for the area in terms of connecting into future routes. And there is potential for us in doing so to integrate proposed landscape within the street and the potential for trees. Now, in terms of the development either side of that, we're looking at how our buildings respond to that street to work towards creating a more of an avenue environment. And this particularly works with looking at the existing trees along that road. How can we set the buildings back to ensure that the new proposals are not conflicting with those trees, and how can we enhance them in the future in areas where perhaps the existing trees are not sufficient or could be improved to create the overall environment along the street. And then onto the wider trees within the estate. So what's on screen is the latest survey of trees in the phases that we're looking at, so 4 to 8, which shows a total of 411 trees on the site of various different classes and ratings. We have a small number of A-class trees, a large number of B and C-class trees, and a very small number of U. Now, we have been working ourselves as the design team to identify the trees on site which we think provide the greatest contribution to the public realm, in terms of particularly in connection with those green routes, but also in terms of the street environment along Seven Sisters Road and frontages like the Green Lanes frontage. The planning team have also been undertaking their own assessment, and then we've been meeting to discuss how our individual review of the site, the trees on site, has aligned. What we've done is amended the master plan to enable the retention of the trees where we think they have the greatest benefit and the greatest quality, but keeping in mind also that we need the development to deliver the housing that we want this scheme to deliver. So there needs to be a balance of areas where there will be trees removed from the site. Just to explain what's on screen, The blue trees are those identified by the planning team as ones that the development should be retaining. For reference, the scheme as you see it retains all but 2, which are the ones in red up in phase 8, and there's one in phase 5 as well. The orange trees on top of that are those that we have identified where they could be retained by the development, and certainly the buildings will be set back to avoid clash with them. So along areas like such as Seven Sisters Road, we're ensuring that the buildings allow for those trees to be retained, same with green lanes and the important points along the perimeter of the site and within the key areas moving north to south. Overall, as it stands at the moment, we're estimating that about 60% of the trees on site would be retained. The next bit is about the kind of underlying structure of the movement around the estate. So this looks at the vehicular routes and connections where we are dealing with some issues that have been changed in the period intervening between the 2014 master plan and now, such as the School Street on the north of Seven Sisters Road, where the Woodbury Grove North has been disconnected, and so is currently only accessible from green lanes. The general principle with the street network is to create pockets, essentially, of accessibility where we can make sure that we can service all the buildings, we can get cars to people's homes where we need to, particularly in areas where we are connecting to existing housing. But there is a conscious decision to not create connections through the estate itself, so that in terms of traffic movements, the cars moving in those areas would be to serve that area only, and therefore we're reducing the number of how busy the streets are effectively, and no rat running through the estate. In terms of parking, we will be providing the reallocation of those social homes that are on site, so ensuring that protected tenants are re-provided with parking spaces. But for new housing and the homes outside of that, will be the estate is essentially car-free, so will be accessible parking only. What that does for us is place a great importance on the ability to move around the estate as a pedestrian, to make sure that we are well connected, particularly to transport infrastructure, but also to the kind of key destinations within the estate, Manor House, the central square, as it will be, the centre. So this is just an overview of how we envisage the pedestrian movement working. And there are various different classifications on here that we look to build on as we're defining the master plan. So from day-to-day routes, which are those in blue, which are if you're getting to the tube in the morning, it's the kind of route you take, as opposed to other routes such as the green route around the perimeter, which is let's say a leisure route where we've called it a slow route on the plan, somewhere where you are more engaged with the environment and it has a very different quality to it. And then the orange routes, which are the north-south linkages, which are really about local residents being able to move through the estate. We are in the process of doing some series of analysis on this in terms of pedestrian movement to ensure that it is working successfully with our transport team. Cycle connections is a very important part of delivering a modern neighbourhood, alongside delivering the numbers of cycle spaces that would be required for all the housing, making sure that then those residents can access the immediate area and wider area. The main proposal around the cycle infrastructure is the dedicated route along Seven Sisters Road. But then in terms of our estate, we are considering how do we make sure that residents can access that safely, that they can cross Seven Sisters Road to get to it, it's usable. This is mostly through provision of on-street cycle routes, but thinking carefully about how they work and how they connect with green spaces on the estate. And then in terms of the facilities around the estate, making sure that there is good and well secured cycle parking at key points so people can access the main destinations. And then coming back to the one of the original points about the idea of intensity here and where we are proposing to locate non-residential uses, be that community facilities, retail and commercial activities, or other elements. The main intention is to really focus those around the developing central square, which sits in the detailed application phase 4 that will be next to be delivered. Outside of that, we are looking at locations along Seven Sisters Road where we can potentially introduce non-residential activities, particularly along the linkages to the green connections. So, for example, around phase 6 and that idea of developing a kind of a youth and maybe community area around this location. However, what we're not looking to do is to extend that commercial use along Seven Sisters Road itself. We don't believe that that is the quantity of retail space or commercial space that would result in would be successful, or that Seven Sisters Road actually needs that much. And that's, again, part of the retail strategy that we're developing and the movement analysis that's being done. What that does mean for us is that we have to consider Seven Sisters Road as a residential environment, how we enter buildings from it, and how we garner the activity that's required along Seven Sisters Road to improve it as a location, but perhaps in sections without resorting to commercial use at lower floors. There are a few slides here on the emerging massing that's coming out of the scheme. I would put this in the context that this is very early proposals, and this is us looking to develop the strategic approach to building heights on the scheme. And I'll talk you through some just general principles of density in a minute. The lighter elements of what's on screen are delivered elements to date, and the darker are the new developing proposals. This is a view looking from south over the reservoirs with Seven Sisters Road running left to right in the centre of the scheme. This is being developed around certain townscape principles. I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail today, but just to give a flavour of the things that we're thinking about. So there is an approach to where we think about tall buildings on the site and taller buildings and where they're located and how they stitch into the existing character of the site and the principles of skyline and visibility from the surrounding area. So the 2014 master plan was set up on the principle of linking taller buildings in with the main north-south green spaces, and particularly around the idea of a cluster in the centre of the development, which is the two blue buildings in the middle. So we're looking to work with that principle of developing a cluster around the centre of the site with a new taller building, which, although not as tall as the existing buildings, will sit within that localised cluster. And then on the outside, two lower clusters that sit around the north of the parks that are developing in Spring Park. So that's an existing buildings there. And then we're reflecting that on the right-hand side with a new potential tall building on the right of the phase 3 park. Alongside that, we're looking at Seven Sisters Road. So the taller buildings are generally proposed within the depth of the site so that they are having less impact on the riverside edges and the environment of Seven Sisters Road. On Seven Sisters Road, we're looking at continuing this idea of developing an avenue along the street and a consistent environment. And what that means, consistent environment. An avenue. So what that means for us is trying to building typology which reflects that environment and takes some of the qualities of the existing buildings with repeat forms which are split with views of green space between them, but also defining a consistent height along the street, which contributes to a consistent environment and quality of environment. And that's reflected in some of these kind of early sketch proposals. So this is looking back towards Manor House on the revitalised Seven Sisters Road, integrating. So it's standing on the south side. So looking back towards, this is the end of phase 6, Manor House is just here. So this is one of the new crossing points across Seven Sisters Road that will lead into the areas to the north. And then the streetscape is enlivened with working with the existing trees, but adding new trees to that to create an avenue along its length, bringing in new landscape frontages around the base of the buildings and entrances, and that consistent building height along its length. And then around the perimeter, so this is a view looking at, it's effectively phase 7 at the north of the site, looking back towards the development over the top of New River, where we are looking to bring that new activity along its length to make sure that people can access it, but also take the river environment and bring it between buildings into the depth of the site, so that we're getting the natural environment into the wider master plan. In terms of the expected density on site, what's on screen is the density levels that have been delivered through the development to date. Now, they range depends on what phase you're looking at, and there are various different impacts depending on whether or not they have a park in them or not. But there is effectively a range from around 500 habrums per hectare up to just under 1,100 habrums per hectare. Now, overall, that density averages out about 680 habrums per hectare, which is around the level delivered by the KSS1 plot.
The average of the whole estate?
The average of the delivered areas so far. So phases includes phase 3. Now, when we are looking at our proposals, we're expecting the density ranges to sit in a similar broad range to those areas delivered so far, but at the same time increasing the average density so that we can achieve the expected number of homes. This is a broad and early study, but looks at where higher levels of density are achievable and possible. So as an example, phase 4, which is the forthcoming phase, being in the center of the site and having the opportunity for taller buildings and working with that existing cluster, we'd expect to deliver slightly higher densities, as opposed to perhaps phases 6 and 7, where factors around the site, be it townscape, existing housing adjacent to it, or the natural environment around it, are going to lower those density levels. So we're anticipating 650 to 750 in those as a starting point. Now, the point with this is that in overall terms, we are, as I said, we have a slightly smaller site area. We're working quite hard to retain the trees on the site and make sure that the development allows for them to be retained. And so there are elements that are impacting the number of houses that we can potentially deliver. That said, our aim through these levels of density is to achieve the overall number of homes that was anticipated in 2014, which is around 2,800. And through doing so, create the type of place and the type of green environment that we think Woodbury Down can deliver as a location and as an exemplar for this area and the whole of London in terms of a place to live. Now, that's the broad background to the master plan. I'm just going to quickly flick through phase 4. So phase 4 is the detailed application on site that will be forthcoming and sits in this area here, that sits between St Olaf's Church and the existing towers and centre around the base of Skyline, and includes the potential central square in the future. these are really summary slides at this point. There's more detail, but given time tonight, I thought best to focus on the wider master plan, but to give you a flavour of where we're going with it. As I said in part of the original, the start of the presentation, we're very interested in the existing buildings on site and what they can, how we can work with them and their character to evolve an architecture in a place which perhaps better represents the history of the estate. Those buildings on the north of Severn Road are very characterful, and we want to see what qualities that we can take from them to inform the detailed designs. The scheme on the right is a scheme that we developed as part of the Kilburn estate regeneration, which took a similar approach of looking at local building typologies to inform a building design and a building place, but doing it in a contemporary fashion so that it doesn't mean pastiche of the existing buildings. We can do it still in a modern fashion. The broad idea for the plot is to take that mansion building typology that exists on the north of the bottom of the J buildings as they wrap around, and create individual buildings which mansion block type buildings which create a repeated form along the two streets, and create street frontages along Seven Sisters Road and Woodbury down on the south side. That gives us a base building form that we can work with that still has separation within it for sunlight, for view, and for green space. Those buildings would then be linked on either side by linking buildings to create the frontage out towards the developing central square and out towards the green link that exists on the left-hand side of the image. And then into that we bring the principle of some taller buildings where we think the local townscape it's appropriate to sit within the context of those existing towers, but quite small format towers that sit quite comfortably. And this has been developed with view of consideration of the local townscape, thinking about St Olaf's Church in particular as a Grade 2 listed building, but also the wider skyline and views of the estate. Just a quick overview of the plan as it's evolving. So you can see those repeated buildings that are proposed along Seven Sisters Road, set back with good frontages so we can maintain the trees along the street, but also provide landscape at the base of the buildings that will contribute to the street environment, with gaps in between that provide views through to a podium courtyard that sits between the buildings. And then on the south side, similar building forms with a slightly different relationship with the street that reflect a different quality of Woodbury Down. On the right side, we are proposing that the central square is a significant part of the scheme that is changed from the original orientation, which had an east-west orientation on the plot. The way we're looking at it is to stitch the arrangement back in a form which suits movement through the estate so that it's more part of the green chain that moves north-south through the site, but also it allows us to look again at the trees on that plot and retain a greater number of them, particularly in the space where they're really going to contribute to that environment. Overall, we're expecting this plot to deliver between 460 and 500 dwellings, which is an uplift from the 423 that were envisaged in the original master plan. We're looking at developing the building form, in particular, to respond to residential quality issues, particularly with daylight sunlight, dual aspect as a major area of planning development in the London plan. The buildings, as they are evolving, are based around a central core with that is daylit as you emerge onto the floor, with small distances to front doors and apartments, which we would all consider all of these to be dual aspect. And so we are addressing issues of overheating through ventilation and outlook and view. In terms of the scheme massing, this is a view looking over Seven Sisters Road back towards the scheme, and the comparison with the 2014 envelope. So The yellow box is the 2014 envelope. And as you'll see, largely we are consistent with what was expected there, with the exception being the taller building on the south, which is part of that developing cluster around the two existing towers. We're working with Fabric, our landscape architects, to look at early opportunities for the central square, and particularly how we can look at the existing trees within there, but create a place which delivers a flexible space for use by the residents, one that could be activated through events, potentially. I know there was an original intention to bring markets and allow that kind of activity to animate the centre of the site, and how that combines with activity both along our edge, where we're looking at commercial and community opportunities along the base of phase 4, and how that builds into existing facilities in the base of phase 3 and along the street to the south. Some very early sketch views about what that could mean, from existing trees through to developing a suds and swale network, which is part of the broader biodiversity approach on the site that could be used to protect the central space along its edge, with the flexible areas sitting within. These are early proposals, and we're still reviewing this, particularly in terms of elements like wind and microclimate, to make sure that the space will function and be a fantastic area for local residents to use. And we'd expect this to our thinking to develop with that respect. Just finally, these are a couple of precedents that the landscape team have been looking about the type and quality of space that could be provided from Deptford Yard, that we think is a good precedent for activity, and the combination with workshops and retail space that exist in the archways underneath the railway, to other locations like the Promenade of Light, where they worked extensively with existing trees to develop the character of a public space, and Greater Green, which is a fantastic scheme in Sheffield that has been developed around the idea of delivering biodiversity and substructures that really contribute to the public realm, and around structures around which we can develop the feeling of Woodbury Down as an estate. And that's where I'm going to conclude for this evening.
Thank you. That was a long presentation, but very useful to us all. I think we all know something of what you're intending now. Just for those that arrive late, just to say this is a properly constituted meeting. We have our legal officer here. It is more informal than our planning meetings, but if you'd refrain from making too strong an assertions as to what your position is and what you might think that may be misinterpreted, that would be good. So we can certainly ask plenty of questions, and you can give some guidance as to what you think is good and bad, but take that on board, please. I've got loads of questions, but I will wait to the end, or at least when you give a lull in the debate. So questions, please, members. A good question. Do you know how to control the... I think we need a stronger projector, by the way. Okay, so I've seen Claire at the back there, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I've read the pre-app report that's been provided by the council. So some of my questions are based on what's in that report, and are they fine to put now?
That's fine.
Yeah.
So what that report is, it's reflecting our design review panel, so our external architects that give up a bit of time for peer review of all of this. So yes, you can of course ask questions about that.
Chair. for clarifying. So I've got a few, but the the first one is from 5.4 of the report, and it's talking about the baseline for re-provision and of social housing in the development in this phase. And something stood out to me, which is it said that they'll be using the floor area rather than the unit mix. So I just wanted to clarify, I mean, in theory, does this mean we could actually end up with fewer social rented flats after this than we originally began with? And I'd also like to ask, because as I understand it, we should be re-providing every single social rented flat. So I was just interested in what it said in the contract.
Is
I'll
that a
start
question
with
for
that.
Anne? Anne, can you just clarify where we are in terms of, we are the client essentially, aren't we?
I think because this is in effect a historical scheme, the council first started looking at it back in the late 90s. And at that time there was it was about decreasing density. So the original master plan had less homes than were on the existing estate, which were round about just under 2,000, although about 20% of those have been bought under the right to buy. The 2014 set a lower target than that in terms of, so there is not direct provision, re-provision of every single home that was on the original Woodbury Down. And that has continued. So this master plan, this iteration of the master plan will look again at the numbers. But it is based, the council entered into development agreement with the partners again 15 years ago and agreed what was the minimum amount of social rented homes that were to be re-provided. And it was based at the time on the sufficient homes to rehouse every secure tenant household on Woodbury Down, and that continues to be the case. There'll be sufficient housing built to rehouse all of the secure tenants on Woodbury Down, and then there will be an excess of homes, because over the course of the years there are less secure tenants living there. So the assumption is that everyone currently living in Woodbury Down has either already been rehoused into a new home, which is about more than 50% of people who live there are already living in new homes. Everyone else living there who's a secure tenant will be rehoused, and there will be additional housing. The percentage of that additional housing is still to be established.
Please do.
Thank you very much. What happens, because obviously this has been ongoing for so many years, and there would have been quite a lot of elderly residents. What happened if they passed away during the regeneration? Are their flats being re-provided?
Yes, their flats will be re-provided.
Stephen, microphone.
Thank you, Chair. I note in the report, I think the sort of the environmental aspects look quite good. I noticed in the report that obviously the proposals around the new river may or may not be able to be delivered, given that you don't have locus over that. Could you just go further into sort of what that means in terms of your future plan, especially if you're not able to sort of utilise the river?
So in terms of the way the scheme are developing it, we are not reliant on the area to the north of the river in order to achieve things like our open space requirements. We are treating it as extra. Now, we would love to achieve what's along the river, and we think in the work that we've done so far with the Wildlife Trust and with the design team and what's been achieved to date on the south, we think this is achievable, and it's certainly something that the development should be targeting. But in terms of the policy requirements of meeting the needs of the new housing on site, we will treat it as above and beyond what is to be delivered through the estate itself.
And Chair, sorry, just a quick follow-up. The third part is reference to sort of has the north side of the river. Is that the Wildlife Trust, or is that sort of separate third party, or?
Thames Water own the land. There is the river itself is the split between the boroughs. The Wildlife Trust's interest and is the ability to take on the kind of the maintenance of that land, as they have done on the south around the East Reservoir. But they would be looking to take both sides of the river and deliver it as an environmental package.
Can I just carry on that? So on the basis, have you costed in what you think it might be? Clearly Thames Water, if you say I'm going to do this for you and it won't cost you anything. I mean, is that your presumption that this development is going to pay for that?
Oh, there we go. So we have costed it in terms of factored it into as a development cost, but the actual cost isn't that high because it's a couple of bridges, and the land is already there, and it's already sort of all it requires is a sort of an additional footpath. So it's actually not an expensive thing to deliver. It's the sort of ambition that's there to sort of overcome the hurdles, which are, you know, it's Thames Water land, it's in Haringey, but it's something that we're looking to take on that challenge because we've already done it on the south side. The parties are willing to have done it before, so should be willing to do it again. So I'm very hopeful that it should be deliverable because I think it's in everybody's interest, really.
Thank you. Katie.
Thank you. I was going to ask about car parking, which is referenced by the DRP. So we've got car parking for returning residents with existing car parking privileges, a bit like Claire's question, really. If those residents subsequently died or moved away, presumably the people who then moved into council flats wouldn't be entitled to a permit on the strength of the previous tenant.
Yes, that's correct. And we think that the level of car parking, that assumptions are being made at the moment about the level of car parking, but we think as the scheme develops, it will keep going down.
Yeah, that was sort of what I was getting at.
Yeah.
So the DRP asks about, they said there's limited justification for the quantum proposed. So, I mean, obviously there's got to be enough space for what you predict for the people who are coming back, who currently enjoy permits. But is there a plan to do anything more socially useful with that land as the demand for parking presumably will decrease slowly over time? And indeed, if someone moves back, I don't know, say I moved back and I was entitled to a permit and I got one, and then I disposed of my car, and then I bought another car in a year's time, would I be able to get a permit for that, for example? Or is it once you stop enjoying a permit, that's it?
In terms of the permit, I don't think that's a scenario that we actually thought of, but I think the assumption is that you will not be entitled to a permit again.
And unless you have a blue badge, of course. I mean, given that, is there a plan to turn any of the car parking into, you know, garden or anything more pleasant over time?
See Jamie there.
Oh, so far the parking that we're looking at for phase 4, the idea would be it would be off-street parking, because the policy for Woodbury Down is no on-street parking. So I think that where you're sort of going is, you know, if you start taking it off street, you could turn it back into garden space. Because of the policy being off street, it's all sort of tucked under the buildings. So that's not quite how it would pan out in terms of turning it back into garden space, but it could potentially become other sort of useful storage space as the use diminishes if parking spaces decline.
Thank you.
So I think, I mean, what we're saying is we need to think through that. Are we going to grass this stuff over, or are we going to turn it into storage space? Or we certainly don't want it undercroft unused parking, I think is part of it.
Well, Chair, I'm just thinking about sort of unused undercroft elsewhere in the borough, which tends to get used for things like, you know.
So we need passive
Sadly,
provision
people
for something useful.
Sleeping rough there, and you know, there's a block of flats in Well Street way, Custom Road, where there were homeless people living there, lighting fires in the car park with like cars with tanks of petrol next to them. It does need a strategy.
Yes, that point is well made. Sarah.
While we're on parking, wondering whether, as I understand it, the provision in the new plan is not just for those people who have parking permits, but for existing residents who might not have a permit at the moment, but they might want visitors' permits. Is that right or not? Is it only people who actually happen
No,
to
so
own
we-
a permit
we
right now?
We are advised the number of parking spaces by the council. So the council know who their residents are that have existing permits to park on the estate. We're told what that number is, and that is the number that we build. So
Okay.
it's just for people that have specific permits for specific cars. Visitors' permits are a different,
Okay.
how
So
that works normally.
if we're looking at parking, another issue would be visitors. Next thing, can we go back to the picture of the where you were looking at trying to sort of replicate or reference the current style of buildings? There you go. Oh, well, it was that one, and then so one of the things that I've noticed from talking to people who live in those old blocks is that they really like their deck access at the moment, and people use it reasonably well. You know, it's a mixture, but people use it quite well. And I've noticed that in the new blocks currently, there's very little of that. So there are some individual balconies, but there are also a lot of just internal buildings with no balconies at all. I just wondered if you're thinking at all about any external walkways in that way.
It is something that we have considered in the development scheme. We've looked at it, and we've looked at some other schemes that have done a combination of deck access and more individual cores. There are, we understand that there are some residents that like the deck access and the commonality that it provides, but it also comes with other problems in terms of the configuration of the flats and access to the front of them, and impacts on privacy and some impacts on quality. We are not proposing to, at this stage, to integrate deck access, but we are giving serious consideration to the quality issues around how we create good homes for the future, and all of the things that we've started to look at, daylight, sunlight, dual aspect, quality of view, how we respond to Seven Sisters Road as a tough urban environment, are things that will inform the next stages of development.
So following on from that, some of the new blocks are kind of quite hot, quite enclosed feeling. Have you thought about those aspects, which if that people don't have balconies or deck access, how to make sure that they don't feel overly kind of overheated and enclosed in these very internal
overheating is a specific issue that, in terms of the next 6 to 8 months of developing, will be seriously considered in our technical work. The provision of a high number of dual aspect flats helps in that regard significantly, because it improves cross ventilation. But also in terms of the idea of oppressiveness, the approach that we're taking at the moment, which is looking at a more broken building form, not continuous courtyard development, which was more like that kind of delivered through the estate so far, allows one for us to increase the levels of dual aspect and also get greater views, visual amenity from people in their homes and from the surrounding streets. So we think it has a double benefit.
Okay. You've got another chart which sort of shows an aerial view of a map of the whole of the phases. Can I go to that one?
This kind of thing?
It's not that one though.
Sorry, while you're
There,
looking for your
okay.
map, can I just say that all of the new homes built to date do have balconies or a private patio space, so there are no new homes that don't have some kind of outside space.
Sorry, and that will continue to be the case. With all homes will have private amenity space.
So I just wanted to check, Woodbury Grove North was included in earlier proposals, and I think just want to check it's not included now, is that right?
It's not.
Okay. You mentioned expanding the space for community space, which is now the edge, and I think that's that. Is that the red square on its own there?
Yes, the edge is this piece.
Yeah. So if you were to expand that, the building next door is a kind of old community hall that we do or don't own as part of the site. Okay. So if you're going to expand the edge, can you just tell me a bit more about what it would be expanding into? Is it into that green block there below, or into the community hall, or what?
Now, to be developed. We are early stages with the master plan, but the idea is broadly that this is a good place to provide non-residential uses at ground floor to allow community use, potential commercial use, if we can find the right type and the right type of operator, or the right community use to go into that phase. We're working with a group called DPQ, who are working on kind of cultural strategy and thinking about the cultural needs of the estate, and part of the work they will be looking at is the type of space that we can create with a location like that and within the central square, and how we bring activity to that as a successful destination.
Okay. That's it for now, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, Claire on.
Claire, I've seen Claire, hybrid Claire. I've seen you, and I'll ask you next time. But I'm talking to real Claire this time. So, Councillor Joseph, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to move to the tower blocks and their positioning, because our report was a bit unsure. Having them in that avenue style along the street, I'd have concerns about the wind, and I think they were echoed in the report. I mean, what kind of impact assessment is going to be carried out? Why has it been decided that we need to have all the height right along the street? Because from the pedestrian's perspective, this could be, real overshadowing, making it quite unpleasant potentially to walk along there. And just on the towers as well, I was interested in the tenure mix in those. Is that the social housing overlooking the road, or is it a mix? Could you tell us a bit more? Thanks.
So the first point on wind and the general microclimate around the estate, we are working with a wind consultant called RWDI, who are part of our team, and they are undertaking tests repeatedly through the process as we develop the approach to massing and building height. To date, so far, they are undertaking desk studies, so they're using the experience to look at it, but then we're going on to do CFD modelling, which will be done as the massing settles down, probably around Christmas time this year, and then ultimately we do wind tunnel tests for the outline scheme to ensure that it's all working successfully. We are aware of existing wind conditions on the site, particularly around the two towers in the middle, where there are some issues about the strength of the winds around the base of those buildings. And we're looking to develop the phase 4 scheme, particularly to we can't improve the condition resulting from existing buildings, but what we can do is make sure we don't make it any worse, and certainly make sure that the square is orientated in such a way as it's successful from a wind environment. That also goes for daylight sunlight, where we do continuous assessments as we develop the massing to make sure that we're meeting standards on daylight in public spaces around the scheme, and within the communal areas, the gardens, and the main public spaces. So we're ensuring that they are all well lit, good quality spaces throughout. In terms of the building heights, the height isn't concentrated along Seven Sisters Road. The taller buildings are inset and away from that. They are focused around the centre, and actually in the centre of phase 5, exactly so that we don't have buildings that are kind of overbearing on the street. And we also want that kind of repeated building typology with breaks in it, so that you get views through, and it's not a street environment that's dominated by a continuous building presence.
So on Woodbury Down, we've developed a sort of a tenure blind approach. So you can't tell which tenure lives where. There is a residence charter attached to the back of our development agreement that talks about social rented homes not being in buildings of more than 10 stories. So we work within that constraint as well. As a general rule, we don't pepper pot affordable homes within buildings because the sort of management side of that becomes quite difficult in terms of service charge and just the operation of that. But we do have blocks where we would have different tenures on the ground floor to make that work. So I think we've done it quite successfully to date, but pepper potting is not a thing within a building. We do have buildings on Woodbury Down where we have some floors by some tenure, and I think on Kickstart Site 4 we've got a shared ownership on 2 floors and private above. So you have to work within the buildings that you've got to make sure that your mix of homes work. But it's not a case where we put all of the social rented on Seven Sisters Road, because we also have shared equity of views. So the good views are shared by all 3 tenures, which is the social rented, shared ownership and private. And the sort of more compromised views are also shared by all 3 tenures. So it's not a case of you put the social rented in the more compromised areas. That's not what we do.
Which is something we asked for many years ago, and is looking like it's being delivered reasonably. Potter, please.
Thank you, Chair. Given the increased drive to retrofit more buildings, which is obviously quite different to when the estate was first developed, I recognise the way you're talking about phase 6, that obviously you plan to demolish and build and put new buildings there. Did you ever consider the possibility of retaining some of those iconic buildings on Seven Sisters Road in that plot? And my second question is, what standards will you be working to in these next phases? Are you working to zero carbon? And if so, what kind of difference in terms of building fabric and design, and will there be to the phases 1 to 3? Thank you.
Thank you. 2 good questions.
Just in terms of phase 6, and I understand what the DRP said about it would be nice to retain the buildings on phase 6. I suppose the bit that they may not necessarily be aware of is, back at the beginning of the regeneration, the council actually undertook their own building condition survey of the homes on Woodbury Down and concluded that it wouldn't be economically the right thing to do to retain any of the existing buildings. We are still of the opinion that those reports are still valid, but understand the point that we would need to update those to just make sure that that's still the case. So we're in the process of doing that, but are pretty confident that the outturn of that report will still be the case, that you will get better homes for your residents if you actually look to demolish them. But we understand, the architecture, and Martin will look to feed the good aspects of that through the design. Does that help?
Thank you, and I will look forward to seeing a review, because I have a friend who lives at Savernake, is it? And she likes it. She thinks it's a great place, and so there is not every single block or every single type of building was condemned outright. I don't think. There are some that are far worse than others. So those brick buildings, yes, please expect to justify while you're knocking them down. I think that's what Claire is looking for. There was a second point, Claire, and that is, what will new buildings, zero carbon buildings look like, I guess, in terms of the fabric and, dare I ask, yeah.
So in terms of the sustainability approach to the scheme, I'm going to split this into two bits in terms of energy usage within the developing building typologies and the embodied carbon, which is the area that has developed kind of post in recent planning policy. In terms of the first, in terms of energy usage, there is the estate works on the principle of a centralised energy strategy, which is delivered as part of the phase 3 development. There is an energy centre within that, originally planned around technology that was relevant at the time, gas CHP approach. The development team have developed a new approach to that over the past year, including a document called the Low Carbon Transition Plan, which moves from gas CHP as the predominant energy supply into an air source heat pump approach as a low carbon energy form that is suitable for the next stages of the development. That's something that has been, I think, now approved. And will form the basis for energy provision in the next phases of the development. So it will be principally an air source heat pump approach for low carbon energy supply. In terms of embodied carbon and the building fabric itself, there's something that we are developing our approach with the design team at the moment. It's under detailed review about what impacts the policy changes, and in terms of general approach, we need to make changes to the way we build buildings. One of those considerations for us is looking at different forms of construction as opposed to more traditional concrete slabs. We are looking at the potential for modular construction here, which is an off-site system which is developed around preformed pods that are brought to site and erected. Now, the carbon impacts of that, understanding the carbon impacts of adopting that approach, is something that we are looking into at the moment. It takes quite an amount of work to understand it, and there are different playoffs between using the impacts of a concrete structure against a modular system, which is based around a steel structure, which is higher in carbon in terms of its initial manufacture, but potentially more reusable in the long run. So there's playoffs and benefits that, as the design team, we need to work our way through over the next the forthcoming period.
Thank you. Okay, I'll ask a few questions now. I guess I've been with this project now for 20 years, and the key issue throughout this has been the quality of the environment of the Seven Sisters Road. And I'm talking about walking up and down it, crossing it, and living next to it. And if you put the picture up, Martin, about the second or third picture that you showed us originally. Keep going. That one there. So the issue has always been for this committee has been that road. And I think you should include that as your sixth consideration. You had 5 themes. I think you should have a sixth, and that is to think much more deeply about what's going to happen on that road. Now, I see from what if you look at the minutes, and apparently we've got the minutes, we've talked about in the past widening the pavements and narrowing Seven Sisters Road. I fear that your proposal for a bi-directional bicycle lane will result in no narrowing, no widening of the pavement. You'll simply replace what you've got there now as carriageway with a bicycle lane and a strip of land down the middle. So I don't think you're maximising this for the residents of this estate. So if we have a look at this picture, I think we can see the original Seven Sisters Road, with a broad footway. And if you have a look at some of your predecessors' work, they've talked about not an avenue, but a tree-lined boulevard. And we as a committee have supported a tree-lined boulevard. And you'll see that the notion was to provide a widened bus lane for bicycles and buses, narrowing the pavement, widening the pavement as much as possible. And this is the first time I've seen this, so thank you very much. This is a glorious picture of what the committee has envisaged over the years, and it's a picture of what the minutes say, and it's not just about taking out a lane and converting it to a bicycle track. It's about thinking about the thousands, 5,000, we were talking about 2,000 households in those days, 5,000 residents and their needs, not simply the needs of a small single issue pressure group. It's the people who are using the buses, it's the people who are walking along those roads and the people that are. So please go away and have a look at the minutes. And you'll see we've talked about this before, and that was the agreement that this committee came to. It didn't say 15 million quid for TfL to do what they want, put bus stop bypasses and God knows what in there. So please go away and think about that. I think what you've come up with for the rest of the ideas are very good. I do slightly. You know, to take down the Happy Man tree was a tragedy, really. You know, it was really sad, and it was quite difficult for us to support that. But we came to the same logic that you had come to. But I just wonder, you know, in an urban environment, when you're doing this tight scale of development, you know, we do understand that occasionally to get double aspect housing, you might need. I mean, this is not a carte blanche to take every tree out of Woodbury down, but there is a balance, and I think I certainly recognise that balance. It's great that what you're talking about in terms of New River, and I hope it is cheap to build bridges. Bridges can cost a lot of money, so be careful what you think about. Thank you very much for that. I think. Yeah, that's how much long. Rowley Gardens. So Rowley Gardens is right at the last development. I think that in terms of Rowley Gardens, it would be, you know, put your thinking caps on and really come up with something a bit different and interesting, because that was a different and interesting development at its time. And I think talking about, you know, what green infrastructure, green buildings will be, they'll be very different then to what they are now. And I think that's all I've got to say. Thames Water. Could we compulsory purchase the Thames Water River and then insist that they do it to them? Because we've knocked people's houses down, don't we? Because for the greater good.
I don't think you need to, because I think they're going to be a willing party. They have net biodiversity increase targets themselves. I think, from what I understand, they need to do some work to the New River anyway, because it needs upgrading. So in the process of doing that, then there's an opportunity to build on that and bring.
That was a theoretical question. Could it be compulsorily purchased as part of the development?
It's also in Haringey, so I don't quite know.
Well, it's a thought, you know. I mean, because it does give you a huge, you know. I mean, clearly it's beneficial, and if Thames Water thought they don't want to play ball, you know.
But they have done to date on the southern side. So
great. What has happened up there? And me and Claire saw that picture. Did you see the picture of our swimming pool, Claire? So we go up there regularly. Okay, so thank you very much. So that's my main point. Claire, real life Claire has got one more question, I think. Please. Councillor Joseph.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll just be brief. I'm interested to hear if you've shown these early designs to the TRA. I believe there is quite an active TRA still on the estate. And just really quickly wanted to touch on the children's play space, because I noted in the report that some of our officers were a bit concerned that there wasn't enough detail around it. So what is proposed, just briefly? Thanks.
So the TRA, I think you're talking about Woodco, which is a Woodbury Down community organisation. So as part of their sort of structure, they have 6 representatives that sit on the design committee. So we have regular meetings with them as a sort of consultative body in terms of how the master plan and phase 4 proposals are progressing. So they are part of that, or they are part of the design committee, which also comprises Hackney Council, Notting Hill Genesis and us. So it's a sort of collaborative working on that master plan, but we still go out to consultation as we would normally do.
PlaySpace is developing strategy with our landscape architects. We know what we need to achieve, and this is a development because of the density levels will be under pressure to achieve the standards required here. That will require us to think quite creatively about how we do it, and the council's own strategy about play on the way and how you maximise the street environment to deliver positive environment for residents and for children and for the older age groups, which are often forgotten when we talk about play spaces. So we are thinking about it, but it is certainly something that needs a lot more working next month.
Thank you. And can I just go back and have another go at bi-directional bicycle lanes? They are really problematic in terms of pedestrians trying to walk over them, because they're just not expecting bicycles to come from both ways, you know? So all sorts of detriment there. How on earth do you cross the road when you want to cycle across it? So, you know, whatever I can do, I think whatever the committee can do to, I mean, TfL are just being, you know, TfL suggested this in the first place, that a widened bus lane would be a good idea. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to tweet that photograph when I get have a look at it in the design and access statement. Thank you very much. Good night.
Good night.